Lil Durk's fans are turning his murder-for-hire case into chaos. First, the judge and prosecutor received death threats demanding Durk's release. Then someone snuck a phone into federal court and leaked photos from inside the courtroom. But their latest move has pushed the judge over the edge. Let me break it down. Before there was a jury, before there was an opening statement, before Lil Durk ever sat at the defense table for the trial everyone's watching now, there was a phone ringing in a federal office in California. On the other end, a stranger's voice, and it wasn't calling to ask about paperwork. Government officials knew in February that U.S. Magistrate Judge Patricia Donahue had received 4 voicemails threatening her life and courthouse personnel as she oversaw the early phases of the case. This wasn't a vague, generic rant either. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ian Ianniello, the lead prosecutor, got similar threats in April. Days before seeking a superseding indictment and the violent case-specific death threat invoked the name of Banks and one of his co-defendants, DeAndre Wilson. Read that back for a second. The threats weren't just angry noise. They name-checked the defendant and his co-defendant directly. That's the detail that turned a string of ugly voicemails into a federal security matter. What was actually said on those calls is where things get disturbing. One caller left a message warning that if the defendants got life in prison, they were going to burn the place down, not as a figure of speech, but repeated, deliberate, aimed straight at Judge Donahue. The line about wanting to burn it to the ground and insisting it wasn't a game is now sitting in federal filings because investigators traced it back to a caller referencing Durk by name. The prosecutor didn't get a pass either. A separate caller reached out directly to Ianniello and told him to free Durk or they'd shoot him. When the prosecutor asked who exactly they meant, the caller made it unmistakably clear he was the target. Now here's where it gets messier. This wasn't a one-day scare that got handled quietly and moved past. Every judge in the Central District of California was warned while a secret investigation was conducted, but the defendants weren't told until Oct 1. Think about the scale of that. Every single judge on that bench across an entire federal district had to be looped in because someone connected to this case was making calls serious enough to trigger a district-wide alert. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force got involved almost immediately after the first voicemail landed. That's not a unit that responds to prank calls. That's counter-terrorism level infrastructure being pointed at a rap fan base. Once this became public, Durk's own legal team turned it into ammunition. They didn't just want the threats logged, they wanted consequences. Durk's attorneys, who say that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California acted as victim, investigator, and prosecutor at the same time, want the indictment against him to be dismissed or for the case to be assigned to a judge who's outside of the district, based on the grounds that the fairness of the case has been compromised. Their argument was straightforward. If the prosecution knew about death threats against the very judge overseeing bail decisions for 8 months and said nothing, how could anyone trust the rulings that came down during that window? Since there was coordination between the court, FBI, and U.S. Marshals Service due to the threats, Durk believes he was robbed of the ability to challenge the judge's neutrality, thus undermining every ruling that was issued while the threats were kept a secret. The government wasn't having it. They pushed back hard, framing the defense's cover-up theory as nothing more than a legal maneuver. Prosecutors alleged the threats were made by Banks' supporters and said the claims of a cover-up were frivolous. In their view, the threats were real, the fans behind them were real, but the idea that this somehow poisoned the judge's rulings didn't hold up. Prosecutors leaned even further into a legal principle that's been tested plenty of times before. The law is clear that threats or other attempts to intimidate the judge do not ordinarily require recusal, prosecutors wrote. Translation: yes, someone threatened to kill you, but that doesn't automatically mean you have to walk away from the case. And it didn't stop there for Judge Donahue. Even after the threats surfaced, she again denied Banks bail on May 8. She didn't budge under pressure. If anything, the record shows the opposite. The rapper stayed locked up regardless of who was calling her office. Eventually, this whole dispute landed in front of the trial judge, Michael Fitzgerald, who had to decide whether the alleged cover-up was serious enough to blow up the entire case. His answer was blunt. When asked to weigh whether Durk suffered any actual harm from the delayed disclosure, he said the harm was just none. Absolutely none. Judge Fitzgerald reportedly remarked he wasn't buying the defense's theory that this amounted to grounds for dismissal. Furthermore, Judge Fitzgerald did not see how these threats would have influenced any judge or justified recusing attorneys or dismissing the case outright. The motion died. Donahue stayed on. Ianniello stayed on. And the case rolled forward toward a trial date that kept getting pushed further and further into the future. But the threats themselves became part of the permanent record of just how volatile this case had already become before a single juror was ever picked. So by the time this trial actually opened in a Los Angeles courtroom, the tension wasn't hypothetical. It had a paper trail, voicemails, an FBI file, a magistrate judge who'd been personally warned about arson and murder, and a rapper's legal team using all of it to try to blow the whole prosecution up. That's the temperature the room walked into. If the voicemails were the first crack in courtroom order, the second came from something almost laughably simple. A phone camera that shouldn't have been in the building at all. Someone snapped a photo of OTF Boogie and OTF Datey, two of Durk's co-defendants, inside the courtroom and posted it to Reddit, Instagram, and Facebook. That single act set off a chain reaction that prosecutors would use for weeks afterward as proof of exactly what they'd been warning about. To understand why this mattered so much, you have to understand the rule that got broken. Electronics are not permitted, with rare exceptions, inside of federal courthouses, and taking photos during court proceedings is prohibited. This isn't a courtesy request. It's a hard rule built to protect the identities and safety of everyone sitting in that room, jurors included. Someone walked in, ignored it completely, and had the photos circulating across 3 different platforms within what felt like minutes. Federal prosecutors were furious, and they wasted no time putting that fury into a legal filing. This blatant violation of the federal rules and the following widespread dissemination of the photograph underscores that an anonymous jury is only one of the security measures this court should employ to prevent improper attempts to intimidate and/or influence jurors, ensure a fair trial for all parties, and protect the judicial process, reads the document. This wasn't just prosecutors venting. It became the centerpiece of their argument for something Durk's team had been fighting since the case began: an anonymous jury. During a pretrial hearing on November 18, 2025, federal prosecutors argued for an anonymous jury, citing threats, national media attention, and the violent reputation of Durk's alleged criminal enterprise. The government's theory ran deeper than one leaked picture. The government's push for anonymity stems from what they describe as a credible threat environment, arguing that Durk's crew, only the family OTF, operates as a criminal enterprise under the guise of a music label, and that its members have a documented history of violence, including witness intimidation and threats against judicial officials. In their eyes, a stranger sneaking a courtroom photo wasn't a one-off. It was consistent with a pattern they said stretched back years. Durk's defense saw it completely differently, and they weren't shy about saying so. Durk's legal team pushed back, calling the request for an anonymous jury speculative and prejudicial, and argued it would hinder their ability to conduct proper jury selection, and that OTF is a legitimate music label, not a criminal organization. To them, painting a record label as a gang was exactly the kind of prejudicial spillover that could poison a jury before opening statements even started. There was a deeper irony buried in this fight, too. Durk's team argued the anonymous jury request came from a government that had itself been sitting on secrets for months. They've also taken issue with the secrecy surrounding the threats and hearings, saying it undermines the fairness of the proceedings. So you had both sides accusing each other of hiding things, both sides using secrecy as a weapon, and a judge stuck in the middle, trying to figure out who was actually telling the truth. The photo leak came at a particularly bad moment for the defense. Lil Durk may have just watched his shot at securing an anonymous jury unravel after courtroom photos of his co-defendants surfaced online, amplifying concerns over witness and juror safety in his high-profile murder-for-hire case. Every argument the defense had built about the government exaggerating the danger got a little harder to make the moment an actual unauthorized photo from inside the courtroom went viral. And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Around the same window, prosecutors were also dealing with the fallout from the confiscated Apple Watch story. Authorities confiscated an Apple Watch from Durk inside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles, and prosecutors say he tried to destroy it, which fed straight into the narrative that this defendant and his circle weren't playing by the rules even from behind bars. That detail later resurfaced when Durk's lawyers revealed jail officials have been keeping Banks in solitary confinement without a disciplinary review after he allegedly was caught with an Apple Watch last August, alone in a tiny cell, 23 hours a day, with no visitation. By the time all of this settled, the leaked photo, the watch, the voicemails, the courtroom had built a reputation before the actual trial even started. Every hearing, every filing, every procedural fight was happening under a spotlight that kept growing brighter, and it was clear that whatever happened once an actual jury sat down was going to be closely, nervously watched by everyone from federal marshals to the millions of people who streamed this rapper's music. While the security fights were playing out in filings and voicemails, a separate battle was consuming just as much of the court's time: whether Durk's own songs could be used against him. This argument had been simmering since the case's earliest days, but it hit its most dramatic point in the weeks leading up to trial. Prosecutors wanted the jury to hear specific lyrics and watch specific music videos, arguing they showed motive and intent. Durk's team called it something close to persecution through poetry. Durk's defense lawyers wanted to exclude all lyrics from trial, arguing they're hyperbolic poetry that carry an extraordinary risk of being misunderstood by jurors. This wasn't a new argument in hip-hop's legal history, but the scale of what prosecutors wanted here made it stand out. Prosecutors meanwhile hoped to admit lyrics from 12 songs as they alleged Durk used his money for violence as the alleged leader of a gang, dubbed OTF 12 songs. That's not a stray line pulled from one track. That's an entire discography, being treated as a body of evidence. Defense attorney Marissa Goldberg, who's built a career representing rap artists in exactly these situations, said she'd never seen anything like the scope of what prosecutors were trying to bring in. She told the court that she and her co-counsel, Drew Findling, regularly represent rap artists, and that this was by far the most amount of rap lyrics we've ever seen proffered in a criminal case. Judge Fitzgerald didn't give either side a clean win. In an early ruling, he sided partway with the defense. A federal judge ruled Monday that some of Lil Durk's rap lyrics would be off limits as evidence at his upcoming murder-for-hire trial, ruling that specific lyrics from the song Hanging with Wolves would be barred. But he left the door wide open on everything else, saying the broader question of banning all lyrics was still being weighed. That still-weighed answer eventually swung hard toward prosecutors. Just a week before trial, Fitzgerald made his biggest ruling on the subject. With a week to go before the start of Lil Durk's murder-for-hire trial in Los Angeles, a federal judge ruled Thursday that the rapper's video and lyrics for his hit single, Pissed Me Off, can be used as evidence, granting prosecutors' request to admit the video and lyrics over the objection of Durk's defense. Prosecutors argued the song wasn't artistic expression in this context. It was practically a confession set to a beat. In their motion, prosecutors argued the song shows Durk's resolve to avenge the death of his friend and protege, Davon King Von Bennett. According to prosecutors, Durk blamed fellow rapper Quando Rondo, born Tyquan Terrell Bowman, for Bennett's death, and was seeking retribution when he allegedly orchestrated a hit on Bowman that instead killed bystander Savii Lul Pab Robinson in Los Angeles 4 years ago. The defense's counter-argument, delivered right in front of Durk himself, was that the song came from grief, not planning. With Banks watching from the defense table, Goldberg urged the court to exclude the song and video, noting that the judge previously severed recently filed charges accusing Banks of racketeering and involvement in a 2022 Chicago killing. Elsewhere in the record, the defense argued that the song was an emotional response to the death of Banks's brother Dante. None of it moved Fitzgerald. The judge allowed the prosecution to use the music video as evidence, and prosecutors didn't stop there. In the final stretch before trial, they kept expanding the pile. The court also admitted 2 additional songs prosecutors planned to use against Banks, Back Again and Still Runnin', after granting the government's motion covering both tracks. By the time jury selection actually began, prosecutors had cleared the path to play a rapper's own catalog back to the jury as if it were a diary. There was one moment during this fight that stood out for how bizarre the evidence got. At a final pretrial hearing, Judge Fitzgerald ruled that an excerpt from a 2021 DJ Academics interview featuring 619 and WAC 100 could be admitted as evidence, a genuinely unusual piece of material to see introduced in a federal murder-for-hire case. A podcast clip sitting in the same evidence file as surveillance footage and phone records. Layered on top of the lyrics fight was a separate battle over a gang expert. Lil Durk's jury would hear from a Chicago gang expert at trial, with Fitzgerald ruling that Chicago Police Detective Kevin Kilroy could testify about gang terminology, the expectation that gang members retaliate for a fallen associate, and the challenges of pulling phone records in gang investigations. But the judge didn't give the government everything it wanted here either. He blocked most of what the government wanted from him including any opinion on which defendants belong to which gang. Every one of these rulings, the lyrics, the videos, the gang expert, chipped away at what the jury would eventually see and hear. And every ruling made it clearer that this wasn't going to be a quiet, contained trial about one shooting outside a gas station. It was going to be a trial about an artist's entire public persona, laid bare in front of 12 strangers. By the summer, Judge Fitzgerald had shown he could rule against either side depending on the argument. And nowhere was that clearer than when prosecutors tried to blow the case wide open just weeks before trial. In June, federal prosecutors filed a third superseding indictment, adding brand new racketeering charges tied to a 2022 Chicago killing. Durk's team called the move exactly what it looked like, a last-minute attempt to load up a case they felt was already thin. In a new statement, Durk's attorneys Drew Findling, Marissa Goldberg, Brian Steele, and Christy O'Connor said, "This indictment is lipstick on a pig." For nearly 2 years now, federal prosecutors have desperately tried to fend off challenges to a very weak case. Durk's lawyers didn't just complain publicly, they filed a formal motion demanding the new charges be dismissed or split off entirely, and they leaned on the clock to make their point. The motion pointed out the trial had already been continued multiple times over Banks's objections. From January 2025 to October 2025, then to January 2026, April 2026, and ultimately August 2026, and defense attorneys argued that if prosecutors' newest indictment forced yet another delay, Banks would have waited more than 21 months for trial. They framed that wait as well beyond the one-year threshold many courts consider prejudicial when evaluating speedy trial claims. This is where Judge Fitzgerald actually turned on the prosecution publicly, and it became one of the sharpest moments of the entire case. He didn't just deny the government's attempt to fold the new charges into the August trial, he scolded them for trying. Judge Fitzgerald scolded prosecutors for the last-minute gambit and ruled that the new racketeering counts would be excluded from the initial August trial. That ruling became a genuine turning point. According to court filings, Lil Durk's defense team, including high-profile attorneys Brian Steele and Drew Findling, successfully argued to have 2 recently added RICO charges excluded from his upcoming federal trial. And the court issued the ruling just weeks before jury selection began, with Fitzgerald ordering that the 2 RICO charges added to the indictment in June be severed from the current case and tried at a later date. Fans flooded comment sections calling it a win, but legal observers pointed out this was narrower than it looked. The latest ruling was viewed as a procedural victory for Durk's defense, as it narrowed the issues jurors would consider during the trial, since separating the newly added RICO allegations from the existing indictment allowed both sides to focus on the charges that were already pending, rather than introducing additional racketeering claims just weeks before trial. The severed charges hadn't disappeared. They'd just been pushed to a future date, which meant this legal fight was far from finished. Fitzgerald also stood his ground when prosecutors tried to use those same new charges as a reason to delay the whole trial. Lil Durk would face a federal jury in Los Angeles as planned, after a judge rejected prosecutors' bid to delay the long-running murder-for-hire case by loading it up with fresh charges tied to alleged gang activity in Chicago, with Fitzgerald confirming the trial would proceed on August 20, brushing aside the government's request for more time. That wasn't the only place the judge held firm against delay tactics. When Durk's co-defendants tried to get their cases split off entirely, arguing they'd be unfairly dragged down by association with a much bigger, more famous name, Fitzgerald shut that down too. In his ruling, U.S. District Court Judge Michael Fitzgerald wrote that Banks was indicted alongside the 3 men for alleged participation in the same conspiracy, and trying the 4 men together, the judge said, served judicial efficiency, given that the vast majority of evidence would be admissible against each defendant. He wasn't done drawing lines even once trial actually started. On the eve of jury selection, he limited exactly how far the government's gang expert could go, and days into the process itself, he was still actively managing what evidence made it in front of jurors, admitting some exhibits and rejecting others, in a steady stream of rulings that showed a judge determined to run a tight ship regardless of who was unhappy about it. Meanwhile, Durk's custody situation kept adding pressure to every hearing. He'd been denied bail repeatedly, including once with a proposal built around serious money and strict conditions. Lil Durk remained in custody after multiple denied bond requests, including a $4.5 million bail package that included cash, 24-hour home detention, and electronic monitoring. None of it worked. He stayed locked up the entire time these fights over lyrics, RICO charges, and courtroom photos played out around him. By the time trial actually opened, Fitzgerald had built a track record. He'd deny the defense's dismissal motions, but he'd also publicly rebuke prosecutors when he thought they overreached. That balance is exactly what set the stage for what happened once real jurors started walking into his courtroom. Which brings us to where things stand today. Jury selection didn't just start smoothly and roll along. It turned into its own kind of spectacle, right there in front of everyone. On August 20, Lil Durk, also known as Dirk Banks, appeared in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California as the trial began, with both defense and prosecution working to narrow down a pool of 80 potential jurors to 16, including 12 main jurors and 4 alternates. That's a massive starting pool. And narrowing it down meant hours of pointed, uncomfortable questions about how people felt walking into a courtroom involving a famous rapper accused of ordering a killing. One exchange in particular showed exactly how loaded that jury box was going to be. During questioning from attorneys, potential jurors were asked for their feelings about so-called gangsta rap, the sort of hardcore hip-hop Lil Durk is famous for, since certain of his lyrics and videos were expected to be presented to the jury by prosecutors. One woman said the music suggests violence to her, while another said the genre could impact her ability to be impartial about the defendants. Think about that for a second. An entire music genre being litigated as a factor in whether someone could sit fairly on this jury. Then came the moment that actually forced the judge to intervene directly. Lil Durk saw a juror dismissed Friday, after the man said the defendants looked guilty and admitted he could not judge them fairly. Juror number 18 said his view came from looking at Lil Durk and the other defendants before hearing the government's evidence or defense arguments, and Judge Michael W. Fitzgerald removed him from the pool as attorneys continued trying to seat an impartial jury for the federal murder-for-hire trial. A man sitting in that jury pool looked at the defendants and decided they were guilty before a single witness had been called, before any evidence had been shown, based purely on how they looked sitting there. Fitzgerald didn't hesitate. He pulled him immediately. But the fact that it happened at all, in open court, in front of the other jurors still waiting to be questioned, says everything about the atmosphere this trial was unfolding in. And that atmosphere is slowing everything down. Jury selection was moving more slowly than expected Friday, with the court only about 40% through the current group of prospective jurors. What was supposed to be a brisk process has turned into a grinding, day-by-day slog, with attorneys on both sides fighting over almost every single name that comes up. The stakes for what comes after jury selection are enormous. Prosecutors said they expect to take 11 to 13 days to present their case alone, meaning this trial is going to stretch on for weeks once opening statements start, with the courtroom atmosphere that's already boiled over multiple times before trial even started now sitting under a microscope every single day. Durk himself has shown flashes of who he is underneath all the legal maneuvering. In one earlier hearing away from the jury fights, he blew kisses at his wife, India Royale, who sat in the gallery. A small human moment squeezed between motions about racketeering and murder for hire. It's a reminder that behind the anonymous jury fights and the courtroom photo leaks and the death threats phoned into a judge's office, there's a family sitting in that gallery every single day, watching a husband and father go through something that could end with him spending the rest of his life behind bars. What happens next is still being written in real time. Opening statements are expected to lay out for the first time in front of an actual jury. The full story prosecutors have been building for nearly 2 years. The bounty, the trip from Chicago, the gas station, the cousin who died in Quando Rondo's place. Durk's defense is expected to hammer the same argument they've made from day one, that the government's case rests on inference, lyrics, and guilt by association, rather than direct proof that their client ordered anyone's death. Whatever the jury decides, one thing is already certain. This case has tested every boundary a courtroom is supposed to have. Threats phoned into a judge's private line, unauthorized photos leaked from inside a federal building, a jury pool split over whether a man's own music makes him dangerous, and a judge who's had to draw a hard line against both sides just to keep the process moving. The verdict, whenever it comes, will close one chapter. But the chaos that got this trial to the courtroom in the first place has already left its mark on how this case will be remembered.